Section 4. Mahamati Bodhisattva again asked the Buddha, Bhagavan, in how many ways do the various forms of consciousness arise, persist, and cease? The Buddha told Mahamati, there are 2 ways in which the various forms of consciousness arise, persist, and cease, both of which are beyond the understanding of logicians. The 2 ways in which the forms of consciousness arise are as a continuity or as a characteristic. The 2 ways in which they persist are as a continuity or as a characteristic. And the 2 ways in which they cease are as a continuity or as a characteristic. And the different forms of consciousness, Mahamati, have 3 aspects: an unfolding aspect, a karmic aspect, and an intrinsic aspect. Mahamati, what we generally speak of as 8 forms of consciousness can be summarized under 3 headings: true consciousness, perceiving consciousness, and object-projecting consciousness. Mahamati, our perceiving consciousness functions like a clear mirror in which shapes and images appear. Mahamati, although perceiving consciousness and object-projecting consciousness are the cause of whether they are separate from each other or not, perceiving consciousness, Mahamati, is the result of imperceptible habit energy and imperceptible transformations, while object-projecting consciousness is the result of grasping different phenomena and the habit energy of beginningless projections. Mahamati, when all the false projections obscuring our true consciousness cease, all forms of sensory consciousness cease. This, Mahamati, is what is meant by the cessation of characteristics. Mahamati, as for the cessation of continuity, when the cause of continuity ceases, continuity itself ceases. It ceases when what it depends upon and what supports it cease. Mahamati, why is this so? This is because it is dependent. What it depends upon is the habit energy of beginningless projections, and what supports it are the projections of the objects of consciousness perceived by one's own mind. Mahamati, take for example a lump of clay and particles of dust. They are neither separate nor are they not separate. The same is true of gold and ornaments. Mahamati, if the lump of clay and particles of dust were separate, the latter could not comprise the former. But they do. Hence, they are not separate. And yet, if they were not separate, the lump of clay could not be distinguished from the particles of dust. Thus, Mahamati, if the intrinsic aspect of our repository consciousness and the unfolding aspect of consciousness were separate, the repository consciousness could not be its cause. But if they were not separate, the cessation of the unfolding aspect of consciousness would also mean the cessation of repository consciousness. And yet its intrinsic aspect does not cease. Thus, Mahamati, what ceases is not the intrinsic aspect of consciousness, only its karmic aspect. For if the intrinsic aspect of consciousness ceased, repository consciousness would cease. And if repository consciousness ceased, Mahamati, that would be no different from the nihilistic views proposed by followers of other paths. Mahamati, the followers of other paths claim that when the grasping of an external world ceases, the continuity of consciousness also ceases. But if the continuity of consciousness ceased, that continuity which has no beginning would end. Mahamati, followers of still other paths say the arising of continuity is not caused by the conjunction of visual consciousness with form and light, but is caused by something else. And that cause, Mahamati, they say, is an ineffable force or primal being or supreme lord or minute particles or time. Section 5. Furthermore, Mahamati, there are 7 kinds of self-existence. The self-existence of origination, the self-existence of existence, the self-existence of characteristics, the self-existence of material elements, the self-existence of causes, the self-existence of conditions, and the self-existence of completion.